Hey guys, it's Daniel. The following is my interview with producer Paul Koderie, where he discusses his work with Radiohead, the Pixies, and more. At the end of this video, I also present additional information about the making of Creep.
I remember when we were working on the song Creep, and I was working with Colin on the bass line of it, kind of overdubbing the bass line. And I said to him, look, this song is Al Green meets the Pixies. It's like the verse is Al Green and the chorus is the Pixies. Here's how it goes. And I kind of led him through that bass part thing and he got it. And, that's kind of what we were, I guess I have to own it that that's what I was trying to do there. And, nobody was upset about it. I mean, they were like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do it.
So that's interesting you
Yeah.
mentioned that because I didn't know you had an influence on the instrumentation, but I do, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, when EMI was going to release that song, they wanted Tom York to redo the vocals to make it clean, and you're the one that told him to change some of the other lyrics. Is this true?
Those things are true, but not together.
Okay, so what happened
Um,
exactly?
well, when we were working on the song the first time with the fuck in it, pardon my French, the first verse was different. I thought it was kind of weird. I thought the lyric was weird. Not the very first lines or anything, but it was like one of the couplets was kind of seemed weird to me. And I said, geez, Tom, you could do better than that. And he said, no, that song's old. That song's done. I said, I think you could. And he kind of stormed out. But he came back half an hour later with the lyrics that are in the song that are much better. So I won't go into what they were, but what he came back with was much better. And he knew it too. So he protested doing it, but he did it.
That's awesome.
He saw my point. And then the fuck thing, yeah, I mean, we had to do a mix. When we left England the first time, it was still in there. And that, I think that helped the initial people that heard the song. I think it made them say like, whoa, it grabs your attention. It's a good lyric. Good use of the word fuck. But for the BBC, obviously, you can't mess with the BBC. So we literally, they brought us back to England to fix it. And the first thing we did was put up the song and we recorded a piece of the vocal that had a different line. And then I had to do a mix where we switched faders on that word, on that line. So, which was pretty common back then. The board wasn't automated and we didn't have Pro Tools or anything. So we had to actually go there and do it, which is something that has some merit to it,
That is so cool.
going there and doing it instead of emailing it. Nowadays I say, just email me the line, and I'll put it in. There wouldn't have been any effort involved, really.
Yeah, for sure. So, from what I understand, you and your co-producer Sean initially thought Creep was a Scott Walker cover?
Yes, that's what Tom said. He said, this is our Scott Walker song. And what we thought he said was, this is a Scott Walker song. So it's funny because both of us thought the same thing. When I asked him to play it to kind of make things more interesting at the session we were at, I was literally thinking like, let's play that Scott Walker tune. After they finished, I said, so that's a Scott Walker song? And they said, no, that's our song. And I said, oh, really? There you go.
From what I understand, the band itself didn't like the song at first initially. When they first played it, they weren't fans of it. Is this fair to say?
I would say none of that is true. They don't hate that song now, I'll tell you. They don't like it when people yell it at concerts, maybe, but they don't hate that song. That song is 30 years after it was released. It's still a big catalog item for them. And it's one reason why they got a large publishing deal with whoever they're publishing us with now. And they don't hate that song. They don't disown it. They don't disown the money from it. Tom wrote the song My Iron Lung about that song,
Yeah.
That keeps you alive, but also puts you in shackles. And so they didn't hate it at first either. I mean, when we finished it, everyone was really excited about it and they were really happy about it. And I think everyone knew that we had something that was going to do some great stuff. And so the idea that Johnny didn't like the song and that's why he put that noise in it. Initially, like when we first heard the song, it already had the noise. He wasn't reacting to the song itself. When they first started working it up, he was basically saying this in his mind. I've never really actually talked to Johnny about this, but my understanding is he was kind of saying like, this verse is kind of wimpy, let's kick it in the ass. And so he did the hot thing to rev up into the chorus, which is just a smart thing to do, really, like, let's kick the song in the ass. I don't think at any point there might have been a moment where they were tired of playing it and tired of people yelling for it and tired of people asking them about it. And, Pearl Jam probably got tired of playing Jeremy too, I mean, if you ask Tom what his favorite song he ever wrote was, it's not going to be that one, but it was what they needed. It was like that song was like a bomb and it just blew open the doors for them. It put them on tour around the world. it made the record company a lot of money, and that got them the opportunity to make the Bends, which was an expensive record to make and took a while to make. But the company had faith in them because they knew they were already a million selling act. So to put yourself in that position on your first record is really hard to do, and it brings its own problems, but it also brings opportunity. It creates opportunity. And that's something that they were very good at taking advantage of. All throughout their career, they've been very good at taking advantage of opportunities that were put in front of them. And the door was opened by that song.
So in that case, I guess, for example, Kurt Cobain was famous for exaggerating how much he disliked certain songs of his. But talking to people that work with Nirvana, they'd say that that was always almost not true. He loved his music. So
same thing with Kurt Cobain. Exact same thing. He was proud of writing a song as much as he didn't like that some people liked it that he wished wouldn't like it maybe or something, but you got to be proud of making that kind of impact out there. That's hard to do. Creep has more plays on Spotify than Stairway to Heaven.
Really?
Look it up.
Dang.
200 million more.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Wow,
you beat Zeppelin, man.
Than the Beatles.
He's got more than the Beatles?
Not in any real important way, but the most streamed Beatles song, which by the way is Here Comes the Sun, interestingly enough, is about neck and neck. Like they're about 60 million behind us, if us can be construed to be the Creep team. I don't know what that means, but I just amuse myself by watching it like a stock, as it just bubbles along.
That's funny.
At the last time I looked, they may have caught up some. I don't know. One thing that somebody said, maybe a Pitchfork or something, but they said, strangely, it's aged remarkably well. Like people know it, and they're like the other night on Jeopardy, the woman who's been winning game after game, she's up to like 40 wins in a row or something, and they were having one of those little chats like, "Hey, what do you like to do?" And she said, "I like to sing karaoke." And they said, "Well, what's your favorite song to sing?" And she goes, "Hands down, it's Creep by Radiohead." So like, what the hell,
Yeah.
Like it's turned into like this karaoke standard kind of song.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the interesting things I've heard about the production of Creep is that the piano at the end of the song wasn't originally intended to be there. What exactly is the story behind that?
In those days, you had to end with your faders all the way down so that there was no hiss at the end of the song, Like as that song falls to the end, you have to, all these faders come down manually on the board to 0 so that at the end of the song, it's not otherwise you'd hear the tape hiss, So things are at the bottom at the end of the song, and then things start at the bottom and they come in as they come in. We were doing a bunch of mixes in a row, and we got to one that something was messed up, and I said, "Let's do it again." And we started in on the mix, and I said, "This mix is going great." And then I looked down and I realized the piano was down when I was supposed to be up, like for the first chorus or something. I don't know. But it was getting to the end of the song, and I said, "Let's just put it in here." Boom. And it was like, it was a mistake, but the mistake was the right thing to do. So that's the thing that you don't get nowadays very much. Is in Pro Tools, it's like a painting. You work on it, and you work on it, and work on it until it's done, and then you stand back and you go, "I think it's done." Hit the button. In that time period, you were mixing. It was like a play. You had to hit your marks and hit your lines, and if you messed up, you had to start over or edit it or do something. You had to do it manually. So the fact that I didn't do it till the end, I realized like that's so much better to have the piano come in on the chorus that isn't loud. So it was a mistake, but that's the whole thing. And Tom really got into that. That's a big thing with Tom, is making the right mistakes.
That's so cool. So, you alluded to it earlier, but My Iron Lung was about Creep, essentially. And from what I understand, the version that appears on the Bends was actually taken from a live recording of the band. And then you had
That's correct.
Yeah, and then you had to mix in, you had to mix down the audience sound and add in Tom's vocal. Is this correct?
After it had been done, those tapes were sent to us in America to mix. And we mixed that song. And I remember there being some audience tracks on it, but we were kind of instructed not to use them. And I think they had put some overdubs on it. And I don't remember if Tom overdubbed the vocals or not. I really don't. They could have been the live vocals. But our mix didn't end up getting used on the Bends. John Leckie ended up mixing that one. I'm not sure how that happened. We mixed it, and I thought our mix was pretty good. I think John's might have been better, so there you go.
Do you know if your mixes still exist somewhere?
Oh, yeah.
Have they ever been released anywhere?
I doubt it. I will say that for OK Computer, all kinds of people were doing mixes for that record. We got the tapes to mix. We did 3 mixes that it did not end up getting used. But the tapes came to us from Eno, and he did mixes, and his mixes didn't end up getting used either, So they ended up using, I guess, all were Nigel's, as far as I know. They had unlimited budget, They were like, let's send it to Eno. Let's send it to Kolderie and Slade. Let's send it to, they were just sort of trying stuff. And we mixed a song called Lift.
Okay.
Lift. But again, I'm not sure that that's our mix, but it might be. It's hard to say.
So basically, there's a whole bunch of professional quality Radiohead mixes all over the place that have not been released.
I'd say that's true, although I don't know what's on that OK Computer box set. There's a not OK Computer. It's a giant box set of everything surrounding OK Computer. And there may have been some others on those. I don't have that, and I don't know enough about it. I haven't really reviewed it. I imagine it's on Spotify or whatever. It may or may not be labeled. It might just be labeled alt mix or Eno mix or who knows. I don't know. If I were them, I'm not sure I would put those out, though, to be honest.
Really?
Because
How come?
why? Unless it's really different, unless Eno just like deconstructed it or something, I think Nigel's is probably just a better mix or something, and they said, let's go with this.
So I know that you didn't produce the Bends, but I'm just curious if you might know what the story here was. The Bends was recorded from February to November of '94, and basically in the middle of the recording, the band just stopped and went on tour. And they've all said that was like a really difficult record to make. It was like kind of a meltdown. What was going on exactly?
I mean, I do know that some songs were recorded twice or even 3 times. They would get to a place of a song and it just didn't feel right. And they would just do it again, which is what you should do. But it took a while and it was frustrating. And they were, they weren't just at someone's house. That's one reason why they did OK Computer at the house like that. Because during the making of the Bends, they were in really expensive studios like the Manor and RAK studios in London and stuff, 2,000, 3,000 pound a day studio, where with the whole band and the, people staying over and eating meals and stuff. It's the burn rate, as they call it, that produces pressure and tension, because people are like, we're scrapping a song that we spent a week working on. That's 15,000 pounds. Really? People get upset about that, and it makes people tense. And, the record company starts going, really, what's going on over there? So I think there was just a lot of tension that, they spent a lot of time touring on Pablo Honey. People's lives were under pressure, but, that's what happens. I've seen it happen. The more success you are, the more pressure you're under to do better the next time, So they started out with a million selling plus record. They were expected to do that and more. And, in fact, they did. But it wasn't easy, to do.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm just curious, considering how successful Pablo Honey was and continues to be, do you know, like, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, but do you know why you and Sean weren't asked to produce the following record?
It's not automatic that you would go back and do the next record. There's reasons that we would have. We weren't on bad terms with the band or anything, but I think it was kind of like, okay, this experiment worked, but they wanted to do other things. They're sort of intellectually curious people. If I were them and I had a chance to work with John Leckie, I would choose him, I mean, John Leckie worked with the Beatles, he was the tape op at Abbey Road. So, why wouldn't you do that? I didn't feel bad. And, you'll notice that they came back to us for help to mix the record, So I don't feel like we were really cut out of the equation at all. They came back to us, and I think we were a big part of making the band successful, when they couldn't mix it with Leckie. So I don't know what happened before that, but when they got back to us, our working relationship was still intact and still pretty alive, And, like I said, they even came to us to do some mixing on OK Computer. But by that point, Nigel had just become almost like a member of the band. And I don't see any reason why obviously you'd want to use him for everything you could, I never felt bad at all that they didn't ask us to produce the record. And that honestly would have been I would have felt a lot of pressure myself to try and beat that. You know what I mean?
That's very professional and humble of you. So that's a really great attitude to have.
We're onto some other shit too. Like we were doing other records, like we weren't sitting around waiting for radio to call us.
For sure, yeah.
We jumped from that to something else, So it wasn't like, I didn't even know they were doing another record. None of it got to me because we were busy. But people started contacting us and saying, "Can you mix some of this stuff?" And we were so busy at that point that we were doing radio mixes like in the middle of the night, because we were in the middle of another album. You know, we were trying to say like, we'll try to do what we can, you know. And some of those mixes were done at 8 in.the morning when we had a session at noon, you know. I mean, I don't feel like we were off the team at all. You know, I didn't feel that way. I felt like, you know what, you know, making that second record was a huge responsibility, and they needed to bring in somebody that was going to be a killer and do it right, and they did. You know, kudos to John Leckie.
So what was that experience for you mixing the Ben's music? Like, did anything stick out to you in particular when you were working on it?
High and Dry, for instance, was a demo that I had heard right at the end of Pablo Honey. Tom came in with a bunch of demos, and they were amazing. And I think it was the Benz and High and Dry and something else. And I was literally like, what the hell? Where were these songs? I had those demos, and I remember playing it for people when I got home, and they were like, wow, this band's going to be big. You know, when we started mixing, the first song we mixed was Bones, and it was like a slam dunk. It was so great. That just started it all off, you know. And I remember driving around with some people in the car, you know, at that point we were going to the beach or something, and they said, what have you been working on? And I said, here, check this out. And I played some of the mixes from the Benz, and everyone was surprisingly like, wow, this is great, you know. I said, really? It is? You know, like, you're so close to it, you don't know. You're trying to make it good, but it's hard to, I can no longer, if I'm in the middle of mixing a record, I can no longer be the person that hears it for the first time.
Yeah.
So again, you could see it, you know, you could just see it, that it had an effect on people. You know, you can tell when music hits, you know, that's all I can say.
Yeah, for sure. Another one of Radiohead's great songs is Street Spirit. What did you think of that song as you were mixing it?
I just thought it was another great song on the record. It didn't occur to me that it was anything more or less than that, really. I love that song. We mixed it, but that's not our mix on the record.
Mm-hmm. So is that how Radiohead approaches all of their records? They send it out to multiple people, the songs, they all mix and they take the favorite mix. Is that how it works?
Not anymore that I know of. I think that once they got Nigel Godrich on their team, it's just like he's another member of the band, and that's his job, is to mix and record. On the Benz, they started mixing it with in England with Leckie, and the band, you know, they had trouble because they realized that they probably shouldn't be there when the mix was happening. Pablo Honey kind of ended up being the same thing. Like I said, we were trying to mix it, and it was too contentious, you know, like what should we do? No reverb, lots of reverb, you know. But so we just said, let's take a break and go home and mix it in Boston, which is what they let us do. But that wasn't the best approach at that time, really. You know, it worked though. Again, you got to do what works. The record company wanted the record done, so I had to get it done.
Interesting. So which of the mixes you and Sean did ended up on the record?
Everything but Iron Lung and Street Spirit, I think. Everything else is ours.
That's cool. So the Iron Lung mix on the album isn't yours?
We did a mix of it.
Yeah.
We did a mix of it. We got a copy of the tape, and we did a mix of it, but they just didn't use that mix.
Gotcha.
John had mixed it. They used a mix that he did for that. There was an Iron Lung EP.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's his mix on that. And then they ended up liking it and used it. Again, it's one of those things, like, I've been on every side of this. I've been the guy that remixed someone else. I've been the guy that got remixed. You know, it's just part of the game. Mm-hmm. You know, you try your best, and you hope that people will evaluate it based on merit, you know, and if you win, you win.
This is a quote from you that I want to read. You said, everybody who heard Creep just started going insane. So that's what got us the job doing the album. So when you say everybody that heard Creep, who are you referring to exactly?
There's a technique that people use at record companies a lot, where they leave their door open and play something, and they see if people run in and say, who the hell is that? So that's the kind of thing that was happening. You know, the A&R guy was doing a little tests of things like that. And, you know, the way that song took off was similar, you know, where people, radio DJ people started playing it. You can see the ones that just start igniting, you know. I wasn't at the record company meetings. We went back to America. And when I left, I told the A&R guys, I said, well, I think you'll bring us back to mix this and finish it, you know. And he said, yeah, sure. And then, you know, obviously that's what ended up happening. So
that is awesome.
You know.
So, you know, how did you guys end up, I mean, because you're American, how did you end up working with Radiohead in the UK? Like, how did that all come together?
Sean and I went over to England specifically to look for jobs, you know, to take interviews with people. We had developed a technique of interviewing A&R men and just introducing ourselves and saying, hey, you know, we're guys from Boston. We know a lot of independent bands. You know, why don't you hire us? And people in America at that point weren't that interested because we hadn't really had a lot of success. But in England, we'd had some critical successes. And so we took a meeting with the guy who was head of EMI, he said, we have this band. They have a lot of guitar players. We're having trouble getting a sound that makes sense with them. He played us a couple of songs, and they were good. And we said, sure, we'd love to work with them. He was basically just like, do you want to try it? The session with Creep was a kind of an audition session where they brought us over to see if, are these guys going to hit it off? How's it going to, does this work? That kind of thing. We were supposed to do 2 songs, but we did a 3rd song, which was Creep. And after we did that, they were pretty much good to hire us. So
that's awesome. So that was EMI who hired you, or the Radiohead directly?
No, EMI. So at the time, in 1992, the record label was calling the shots, not the band.
So what were the 2 other songs you worked on aside from Creep?
One was called Inside My Head, and the other was called, what the hell was it called? I don't even remember it to this day. I mean, I could look online and find it for you. They never came out on an actual Radiohead record. The recordings do exist, and I know that they came out on some kind of bootleg or there was some release of them in some way. They weren't the band's best songs, honestly. I think the record company wanted us to do them kind of like a test, like, can you turn these into amazing songs? And we didn't really at all, but we did come up with one.
Yeah.
Instead, so you have to figure out how you're going to do that.
Yeah, for sure. You work with Dinosaur Jr. and the Pixies. Both have been cited, especially by early Radiohead, as big influences on them.
People say Dinosaur Jr. I don't remember that coming up much at all. It was all Pixies. Johnny was crazy about him. He loved him. And I think that really helped. I think when somebody said, well, are you interested in working with Paul and Sean? And they said, well, what have they done? And they said, the Pixies. And Johnny was like, sold. Let's do it. Let's try it. And Tom had a favorite band in America called Miracle Legion, who were a Connecticut band fronted by Mark Mulcahy, who's still making music, and he's a great talent too. And I had done a record for them previous to that Tom really liked. And so I think that between Johnny liking the Pixies and Tom liking Miracle Legion, I think the 2 of them together were like, yeah, that sounds good. I mean, the record company was offering them this, and they said yes. And so that's why it happened. So, the Pixies thing is an absolutely direct connection. But there was absolutely no discussion of trying to sound like the Pixies in particular. And in fact, the record that we were playing the most at the session was Dry by P.J. Harvey. That was a huge, and there's a lot of loud, soft stuff on that too, So they were into that dynamic.
Interesting. So I did an interview with Nick Ingman, the string conductor on OK Computer, and he said that in his view, Johnny Greenwood is the musical muscle of the group, and Tom York is the punk rock attitude. Would you agree with that assessment?
Oh, yeah. Johnny went to music school, and he's a smart guy, and he's really talented. So you put all that together, and you have Radiohead were always ahead of the game because they had someone who knew how to arrange things and arrange the guitar parts and arrange the strings to go with the guitar parts and the background vocals and all that stuff. I'm not saying Johnny does everything like that, but he knows how to throw in interesting things that make their music more interesting than the typical rock band. And that's been a huge part of their success. He's pretty much full-time writing orchestral scores now with tremendous success.
That's awesome. So how are the guys in the studio to work with? What was the chemistry like in the band during the making of Pablo Honey?
They were very young. They hadn't been we were in a big studio, away from home. We just started to have fun. There was some tension there, because there was money on the line and everyone wanted to make a good record. And, people were, nervous about that maybe. But I think we just, at that point, Sean and I had a pretty good act together. We had our game on and we knew how to make it fun and have fun doing it. And so I think our vibe on that record was really pretty good. It wasn't tense or anything. I mean, when we got to mixing it, things got a little tense. We ended up saying, like, let us go home and mix it at our studio and we won't have these arguments. And that helped a lot. We went back and mixed it in Boston, except for Creep and a couple other things that were already done. I don't remember having any real problems compared to some groups. Geez, as they got more successful and more, my understanding is that being in the studio has sometimes been difficult, but at the same time, Ed told me when they were doing OK Computer, it went so good they couldn't believe it. It was so easy to do that. Tom's kind of intense, Ed's fun, and Johnny was really thinking a lot. You could tell. And Phil was playing drums, and Colin was. We hung out with Colin probably the most because he was kind of gregarious and he liked going out to dinner and stuff like that. So we went out for pizza with Colin every now and then. So. But really, we try to be friends with the band and we're on their side and we're not there to kick their ass or anything in particular. They were a team. They were a good team. and they stuck together. You noticed, like people haven't quit the band. They had the same managers for 25 years. They had all the lighting crew and the visual stuff around them. That's all been one team from the start.
You mentioned just now that Tom is an intense personality type. Like, what was he like to spend time with? What was he like to work with?
I think we had a pretty straightforward relationship, Even at that early stage, he was pretty much of a pro, and he knew what he had to do, and he did it. That's not always true. Sometimes people know what they have to do, but they don't do it. And that's not as fun as a producer because you have to figure out some way to get them to do it. But with Tom, it was mostly just like, set it up and let's go, Sometimes he would get frustrated because he wasn't getting what he wanted to get.
Interesting. So another song from Pablo Honey I wanted to ask you about is Anyone Can Play Guitar. From what I know, you, your co-producer Sean, the band, everyone play guitar on that track or something along those lines. What exactly is the story there?
Well, that's an example of we were trying to have fun, and we had this idea. I'm not exactly sure whose idea it was. It may have been ours, or it may have been Tom's or Johnny's or something. I don't remember. But the idea was that, if you have a song called Anyone Can Play Guitar, well, let everyone involved, So we had this middle part of the song, kind of the solo part, and we just made a slave reel, and we had a lot of open tracks, and we just had everyone record a guitar part, everybody in the band, including the drummer and the bass player, and I did one, Sean did one, the cook up in the the kitchen. We had everyone come and play something. And some people, it was kind of a personality test in a way. It's funny, what people ended up doing or how they ended up doing it. And then we just did a kind of a big collage mix of that in the solo part. Some of the people didn't do anything that was terribly memorable, so you probably won't be able to hear that. I think Johnny played some stuff with the edge of a coin that was cool, and you can hear that. A lot of people I remember I just did kind of noise, because I didn't really want to try to play guitar. It was fun to do, and I think, it took us, that was like a fun afternoon,
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. So, one of the things about that song that sticks out to me is the Jim Morrison references. Do you know why Tom had that thing against Jim Morrison? Like, what was the story there?
I don't. What does it actually say? Remind me.
I want to be famous. I want to be Jim Morrison. Something along those lines. He was kind of mocking him in a way.
Well, Jim Morrison was a pretty unhappy guy, so it might be a reference to that.
So, just going back to like the kind of that fun thing you were doing with the guitars, are there any other funny stories you remember of your time with Radiohead, just in general?
Sean and I had a large collection of recording oddities. We played to keep the atmosphere light, like just to have fun. And, you develop little catchphrases. That's why the record's called Pablo Honey, if that's a Jerky Boys routine. Pablo Honey was one of those things that people just kept saying throughout the record, and that's why I think they ended up. I had no influence on them choosing that to be the title, but I thought it was interesting that, that tells you something that they did that,
So cool. So that came from one of your audio tapes?
Yeah, the Jerky Boys. Did you hear about them? You know them?
I haven't, no.
The Jerky Boys. There's another famous one called the Trogs tape where they're in the studio and they're having an argument and they're drunk, I guess, and it's hilarious. It's kind of the thing that inspired Spinal Tap.
Okay.
It's kind of that kind of thing. So there were all these kind of underground tapes that were circulating around, and we had a lot of them, and we collected them, and we had friends who did prank phone calls and stuff, so we had some original ones. We were obsessed with Goodfellas, the movie Goodfellas. We must have watched that 5 or 6 times. The studio had a tape of it or something, and we said, oh, it's a great movie, and it's such a great movie.
Oh, yeah.
When you're in the studio, when you get into overdubs, the other people always need something to do, So that, there was kind of like a TV lounge with a video recorder and stuff. So it wasn't the only movie we watched, but we ended up watching a lot. It was really pretty efficient. We didn't have that many days. We didn't do as much on the other 2 songs probably as we would have if we hadn't come up with the third. But, going into any session, it's about coming out with something that's great, So What are you going to do? How are you going to do that? That's what you have to do.
For sure.
So as you discussed, another one of the bands you've worked with is the Pixies. You recorded the Pixies' 17-track demo, The Purple Tape, in 1987. 8 of those songs were released that year as the On Pilgrim mini LP. Did you think the band was going to take off?
You just have that feeling where, I think I was editing that song Subculture onto the reel.
Yeah.
And the original demo version was really good. And I'm like, wow, this is good, And I started going places. I went with some friends. I went to Las Vegas a little while later. I walked into this record store and they were playing, after the record came out, they were playing it, On Pilgrim. People were coming up and saying, who is this? It was one of those moments where you're like, nobody knows who I am, but I'm sort of seeing it happen in front of me. You could see that people getting excited about it. So it was I mean, another thing like that happened was I went to a Palladium in New York City one night to, with some people. It was a big dance club in Midtown, and they played a song from the record on the big system, and it sounded great, and everyone danced.
That's
So,
awesome.
just things like that. You see that happening, and you're like, oh, this is happening.
So I got a question about On Pilgrim for you. So from what I understand, you guys recorded 17 tracks for the Purple Tape, 8 of
Is that
which
right? Yeah, something like that.
yeah, 8 appear on Come On Pilgrim. My question
Right.
is, why didn't you guys just release all 17 at once?
Ivo got the Purple Tape, and he said he picked those songs to be on Come On Pilgrim. That was his deal. Here Comes Your Man wasn't on Come On Pilgrim,
Yeah.
but we recorded a version for the Purple Tape that was arguably better.
Mm-hmm.
So, he knew to save some things. I think Ivo was a very smart record man.
What was his full name?
Ivo Watts Russell from 4AD. Ivo Watts Russell. It's hyphenated. Watts Russell.
And he was the label head?
It was his label. I mean, it was beyond, like, he wasn't running the label for someone else. He was the label. Real example of a label, a classic, like, indie label, where the people that ran it, they did what they wanted to do, and they were successful at it because they had good taste.
The Pixies self-titled EP from 2002, it's essentially the Purple Tape. All 17 songs that you guys did for the Purple Tape.
Yeah, it was re-released.
Yeah. So are those the original recordings, or were they redone?
No, they weren't redone. The Purple Tape was not officially released, I don't think. I think it was like it was a demo. It was a tape that was sort of circulated around.
So on Come On Pilgrim, are those the original Purple Tape recordings, or did you guys re-record those for that mini LP?
There was only one session. And what came out of that were, quarter-inch masters, and those were used to make the cassette, and then they were used to make the record. Right. And probably used again to make the 2002 record,
So your session with the Pixies, was that their first professional recording session?
Not quite. They had some kind of demo early on that I couldn't tell you much about. I wasn't involved. Then I think at one point, Gary and Joe Harvard, the guy who was one of the other partners at Fort Apache, they kind of came over after a gig and did a 2-track, kind of live to 2-track thing in the middle of the night, just to kind of get a vibe of the studio. Like, I think the Pixies maybe said, well, what's your studio like? We want to see it. So they went over there and they did a kind of an impromptu 2-track recording, which Gary probably has. I don't know what's on it. I wasn't the engineer. I don't know. But then Gary made a deal to record, made a deal with them to record the demo. And we had a staff meeting, and Gary said, well, I need to record this band. We don't have very much money, but I predict that you'll become famous if you record this.
Really?
And I said, I'll do it. I think I got $200, and Gary gave me a little portable CD player, a Sony CD player, which was actually kind of a cool thing at the time.
That is awesome.
1987. Man. Down the line, it did pay off. He was right.
That is awesome. So the studio you recorded Come On Pilgrim at was Fort Apache, Gary Smith's studio in Boston. From what I understand, wasn't Surfer Rosa initially going to be recorded there as well?
Albini was going to come to Fort Apache and do it. And he called me, and we had a long conversation about what gear we had, and do we have this and that, and how did I like to do this and that. But then there was a falling out between managers, and they went to a different studio, which was nearby in Boston. Friends of mine owned it. I got in trouble because when they couldn't do it at Fort Apache anymore, Albini called me and he said, where should we do it? And I said, do it at this other place. And they did. And I got in trouble for that because Gary thought I was trying to steal the record, but it didn't involve me at all. I had nothing to do with it. I went to a party when they finished the record. I went to a sort of a playback party that they had at the studio. And Albini strung it up, and the first song he played was gigantic. And, everyone's jaw was just on the floor, like, oh, crap. What the hell's that?
That's cool.
You've worked with not just the Pixies and Radiohead, but like you work with Hole, you work with you work with Warren Zevon. When you work with these artists and then you see them take off, how does that feel for you as the person that helped put the music together?
That's why I do it. Being a record producer can be a very satisfying job, because if you can help somebody pull it all together and make something important, that it becomes part of culture, that's a great feeling. It's very fulfilling, So how do I feel about it? Great. I'm psyched. And, sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes something is successful at first and doesn't last. Sometimes something is unsuccessful at first, but ends up being successful later and later, like with Creep, it was successful at first. And then it was so successful that people started to backlash against it and say, like, oh, no, don't play that, But now, 30 years later, it's just a staple. There's another band I work with called Portugal the Man.
Yeah, yeah.
And they have been bubbling under and coming up and coming up. But then, a couple of years ago, I think it's been a couple of years now, whatever, but they broke through with a song that was just everywhere. And it's on commercials and it's just everywhere. And it's great to see, I'm personally happy that they've done that. I didn't do that record, but you just always feel like you want to try to help people get somewhere like that, where people are really, that song has become important to people. It's part of their life.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. That's awesome. And so how did the success of Creep affect you personally? Like, how did that affect your life?
It just changed. I mean, once you have a platinum record and you have a song that's been on K-Rock, on heavy rotation, it kind of turned things around first in America. Like now we could go to LA and get meetings with A&R guys who wouldn't meet with us before because they're like, well, you guys haven't had any platinum. It's kind of like catch-22, It's like you're not going to have a platinum record unless you get a job, but you can't get a job unless you can show them that you've had a successful record. So when that song was big, we were out in LA and it was just getting played on the radio every hour. There were meetings that we took at like CBS or something where we were in the office with the A&R guy and people were looking in the windows and like crowding like as if we were like fish or something. Like, who are those? Those are the guys. So it was a little bit disconcerting actually. I didn't really like it.
Really? That's nuts, man.
Well, yeah, it was a moment and that was great. So how did it change us? Yeah, it got us more work, for sure. And, more work leads to more work. And you just got to keep, it's like hitting a home run. You go like, all right, you're the hero of that game. But then you got to play the next game. Still got to hit another one,
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't make your job any easier.
Yeah,
just
for
gets
sure.
you better jobs.
Yeah. So what does it feel like? I mean, I'm just curious. When you work on something and then you hear it on the radio everywhere, what is that feeling like?
It's a pretty great feeling. I can't say it's bad. There's always that shock of, when it comes on and you go, wait, that's, I know that. First few times that it happened, you can't believe it. It's so great.
So how did your music career begin?
I was a musician in high school, but I was also, my grandfather was a big ham radio guy, like amateur radio. It grew out of the Second World War that they wanted to have citizens who could establish a communications network in case the radio stations were blown up. All these guys had shortwave radios. And so my grandfather had this like lab at his house where he had all this crazy equipment with dials and, it was like a mad scientist lair and it was full of soldering irons and parts and he made things. And so I kind of got a taste for it there. And then I played music in high school on through college. And we had a new wave band in Boston, but we always did our own demos. We had a home studio and we really enjoyed that. I just realized that I kind of enjoyed that more than just playing in bands. Playing in bands is hard. You have to ride in a van a lot, and you end up playing the same songs over and over again. And the more popular you get, the more that you have to play the same songs. So I liked working with different kind of bands, producing their demos. And Boston at the time was Boston was a place where you could make a tape and get it on the radio, if it was good enough. There was a lot of competition to do that, to sort of break through. There was a way to break through. Nowadays, it's hard. There's different ways, I guess, but That's one way it's changed. The way to break through back then, you made a tape, and we had literally a reel-to-reel tape, and you would take it to the radio station, and they would make a cart out of it, and because that's what they played was carts and cart machine. So, but you could go to BCN, you could go to FNX later on, and you could take them a tape, and at the very least, you could get on the Sunday night indie local rock show. But now, you tell me what's the way to break through. I guess you got to make a TikTok video, right?
Yeah, I mean, now
you have to produce something yourself that breaks through on the net. It's not going to be a radio station that does it, because nobody, you can't get to radio as a unsigned band now. I don't think.
No, I think you're right. I mean, maybe if it's college radio or something, you can. But I mean,
maybe
the thing is too, also because the stations now, they're also more concerned about their bottom line, so they're just going to put out what they know is going to sell. So The experimentation is kind of dead, unfortunately. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's very few people who are trying to poke around and see what they like or what other people might like, or try something that they're not sure about or whatever.
So what are your thoughts on digital versus analog recording? One of the things people point out with analog is that it was more difficult in many ways and that you're more likely to make mistakes, but sometimes those mistakes would come out cool.
The mistakes can be frustrating, and mistakes aren't always your friend, but sometimes they are. That doesn't happen anymore. Only on the recording side. Only with like maybe you've had the wrong mic up or something happened. You can still make a mistake, but usually all it does is mess you up nowadays. It's hard to make a good mistake. It is like a painting. You can work on it. Like, I'm working on a record right now. I come in the morning, I pop up one of the songs. It's exactly where I left it. I'm fine with it, really. The one thing we sometimes do is record bass and drums, like basic tracks on tape. Drums do sound better on tape. So if you have a big budget, you can do that. I haven't done that in a while.
Creep was released as the first single from Radiohead's debut record Pablo Honey on September 21st, 1992, and remains the band's biggest hit to this day. Interestingly though, the two producers who worked on the song, Paul Koderie and Sean Slade, initially thought Creep was a cover. During Radiohead's first Pablo Honey session, the band played the song and Tom York sarcastically referred to it as the Scott Walker song, Scott Walker being a famous pop singer. The two producers, however, didn't realize Tom was being sarcastic. During the next session with the band, the producer suggested Radiohead played their Scott Walker cover, which is when the band clarified that it's actually an original song. Now, interestingly, the guys in Radiohead weren't too keen about the song, even though the producers thought it was a great track. In an interview with the Dennis Ball Show from January of 2021, Paul Koderie discussed how he got the band to focus on Creep. Here's what he had to say. I think that the song is a good example of the 10,000 hour principle. The idea that you have to be ready when the opportunity comes along, and so at that point when they cut that song, I had a lot of experience and I was ready to handle it. They were very inexperienced, but I realized that that was the song we should be doing instead of the song that they told us they were going to do. When we were at the studio in England, when we finished it, we kind of worked on it for like 2 days. And at the end of one of the 2 days, the group was all there and we played it, and Tom York turned to Jonny Greenwood and he said, "What do you think?" Johnny said, "I think it's the best thing we've done." Everyone agreed and we all went home. And then a couple of weeks later, the record company called us and said, "Everyone's freaking out about the song. Can you fly back to England and do a mix without the bad words in it?" We said sure. So we flew back and we did a mix without the bad words, and that's the one that got played a lot on the radio. So what exactly is the song about? I'm going to be exploring that and more in this video. Tom York first wrote Creep back in 1987 while he was a student at Exeter University. Exeter is a city in the UK about 3.5 hours of London and 2.5 hours of Abingdon, Abingdon being the town where Radiohead started. I'll be getting into detail about that in just a bit. Tom York once said that the song is about being in love with someone but not feeling good enough for that person. In his words, there's the beautiful people and then there's the rest of us. In 1993, when asked about the song, Tom York said the following: "I have a real problem being a man in the 90s. Any man with any sensitivity or conscience towards the opposite sex would have a problem. To actually assert yourself in a masculine way without looking like you're in a hard rock band is a very difficult thing to do. It comes back to the music we write, which is not effeminate, but it's not brutal in its arrogance. It is one of the things I'm always trying, to assert a sexual persona and on the other hand trying desperately to negate it." In terms of the specific real-life situation which inspired the song, according to the book Radiohead Hysterical and Useless, Creep was inspired by Tom York's interest in a woman he didn't know. He was infatuated with her, and in his opinion, she was out of his league. He'd never met her before, never spoken to her, but he frequently saw her in different bars and found himself following her around. On one occasion, Tom got drunk and built up the courage to go talk to her. As he did, he confessed his infatuation to her, and apparently she freaked out. Musically, Tom York based Creep off of the song The Air That I Breathe. The best-known version of The Air That I Breathe was the one released by the Hollies in 1974, though that version is actually a cover. The original version of that song was written by Albert Hammond and Mike Hazelwood, and released under Albert Hammond's name in 1972. There are definite similarities between The Air That I Breathe and Creep, so much so that Rondor Music, the publisher of The Air That I Breathe, sued Radiohead in order to get Albert Hammond and Mike Hazelwood a percentage of the song royalties and songwriting credits. Despite this, things seem to get resolved amicably, and Albert Hammond has said that he and Mike agreed to take only a, quote, little piece of the royalties. Interestingly, Albert Hammond did an interview where he discussed how he was informed there even was a lawsuit. Here's what he said. "My publisher heard Radiohead on a radio show saying, 'This song was inspired by The Air That I Breathe.' Suddenly, I was sent a piece of paper to sign, and I looked at it and it said, 'You have a third of the song.' And I go, 'What?' I felt very uncomfortable, but there was nothing I could do. It was a legal thing. I mean, they actually admitted to being inspired by my song. Now, whenever anything, they use Creep for a movie or for a game or for whatever it is, they write to me and they say, 'Would you give permission?' And I always say, 'Yeah, sure.' All these lawsuits and all the things, I think it's silly. It shouldn't be about money and it shouldn't be about egos. It should be about love and wonderful things. That's what I feel. As mentioned, Creep was recorded during the Pablo Honey sessions, which took place from September to November of '92. There were 3 producers on the record: Chris Hufford, Sean Slade, and Paul Koderie. As mentioned, Creep in particular was produced by Sean and Paul. In addition to getting the band to really focus on Creep, Paul Koderie also convinced Thom Yorke to rewrite some of the lyrics in the song. Creep turned out, of course, to be a major success for the band, but eventually the demand for Creep began to wear thin on Radiohead. As the years progressed, the band began to play the song less and less frequently. To this day, they rarely play it live anymore. Thom Yorke summed it up nicely in 2017 when he said the following: "It can be cool sometimes, but other times I want to stop halfway through and be like, nah, this isn't happening." Whether or not the day will come when Radiohead starts to play the song more frequently, we'll have to see. But regardless, the studio version of the song is still played frequently on rock and alternative radio stations all over the world, and the official video on Radiohead's YouTube channel is close to 500 million views as of the time of this recording. If you tally up all the different uploads and live performances on YouTube, the number gets closer to 1 billion. Now, as mentioned, Creep was released in '92, and Thom Yorke first came up with the song in '87. 2 years before this, in 1985, was when Radiohead was formed, though the band wasn't called Radiohead right away. Here's the backstory. Radiohead was formed in Abingdon, England in 1985, though their original name wasn't Radiohead. The band members all went to the same boarding school in a town about an hour and a half west of London. The town's name is Abingdon, and appropriately, the name of the school is the Abingdon School. All 5 members of the band attended the school together, though they were in different years. Thom Yorke and Colin Greenwood were in the same year, Philip Selway and Ed O'Brien were a year younger, and John Greenwood was 2 years younger than Tom and Colin, John Greenwood being Colin Greenwood's brother. The young band would typically rehearse together in the school's music room on Fridays, and so they named their band On a Friday. Though the band didn't technically break up after high school, it wasn't until 1991 when they began to really gig regularly in Oxford, a city about 15 minutes north of Abingdon. During one of their performances at a tavern in Oxford, a producer named Chris Hufford was in attendance and was impressed by the band. Chris and his partner Bryce Edge would end up producing a demo tape of the band and also became their managers. To this day, Chris and Bryce are Radiohead's managers. The demo tape eventually got into the hands of EMI, who liked what they heard. The label would soon sign On a Friday to a 6-record contract, and it was EMI who asked the band to change their name, and thus the band chose Radiohead as their new name. The inspiration for this name came from a Talking Heads song that all the band members liked, a song named Radiohead, which is from Talking Heads' 1986 album True Stories.